Hello and welcome to the Beauty of Human Biology. I am your host, Tricia Reid. We're going to be exploring the language of the chakras and understanding that felt experience of being a human. I look forward to our journey together. My guest today is Wade Lightheart. Wade has lived in ashrams, competed at the Mr. Universe as a drug-free vegetarian. He's wrote several books and co-founded a nutrition company. Wade knows it's possible to turn suffering into joy, which is why he serves as an advisor to the American Anti-Cancer Institute. This allows him to help people recover from the very disease that took his sister's life. Over the years, Wade has continued his ongoing quest to uncover the deeper mysteries of the human experience, physically, mentally, and spiritually. When it comes to like the chakras and energy work and like how you've explored life, with you coming to the ashrams and exploring other spiritual practices, like what caught your attention? Why did you go to the ashram here? And how did that help you with your journey? We're drawn to different things, you know what I mean? So like, what was it that drew you to that? Like
such a deep question. I like this.
It?
Well, I don't get asked this stuff a lot. I think there's a karmic component. So my relationship with my spiritual teachers are not limited to the narrow present or the limitation of one lifetime.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's a big piece. So what seems kind of a natural inclination and drawing in nature and interest wasn't necessarily manufactured in this lifetime. So like, why does a guy from, the middle of the woods in Canada end up going to an ashram in India or going to down to Escondido to Hidden Valley and all that stuff now? So that's that part. But the secondary part was, when I was in 1996, I read Autobiography of a Yogi. A friend of mine gave it to me that I was working with. And once I stumbled through the first 80 pages wondering what the hell am I reading, then I really got into it. And
where were the hangups though? And were you like watching your time? Were you losing time? Like, did you go back and read the same page? I guess is how I would explain that.
I can't recall from 1996 was a long time ago. I just remember the first part of that book kind of stumbling and fumbling about this mystic that lived in this strange life in India. And then the Tiger Swami came in and I was like, you mean there is a possibility of a muscular vegetarian, monk that fights tigers? Okay, this is getting interesting.
Like, I could do this. Let's do this.
I was like, okay, what's this guy doing? So that was one of the hooks. And what I realized is Yogananda was laying out specific events that would capture the imagination of his potential listener. Because the book isn't really about his life. I think a lot of people make the mistake. These are elements selected in his life as teaching and illustrative purposes for the kind of things that people run out to in autobiography of a yogi. It's not autobiography of Yogananda. The details of his life, I'm sure he would say are insignificant other than as a point of reference or teaching or not really anything else.
But did you know that at the time when you were starting it, or did you?
No, I had no idea. No, I had no idea.
Okay.
Like, I'm the novice that doesn't understand the true exquisite nature of the teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got into that, but I didn't meditate for 4 years. I missed the meditation piece.
Okay.
But what it did do, it resolved my personal issues that I had with organized religion in the West.
Mm-hmm.
And so that it was a necessary evil to get to a certain point, but had its limitations because of organizational structure. And I think a lot of people throw the whole baby out with the bathwater, and there's some great moral and ethical foundational components, but within a large structure it becomes limiting for one's personal development. And that's where meditation comes in, because now you're not reliant on an external source to tell you what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
You are taking a process of internal exploration into an aspect of consciousness, whether that's physical conscious, emotional conscious, awareness conscious, all these different touch points that you can talk on, which correlate with the chakras and the colors and all that sort of stuff. But you're reversing the engines outward, inwards, and discovering a new world. And through that tool, as I got into meditation, then it was like, okay, well, my next natural progression was to kind of go to a group that people were doing this. So now there were people that were talking the same language, so to speak. It's like, okay, we're understanding why we're standing there, not sitting in a room for a couple of hours, not saying anything, breathing. Well, that sounds pretty boring. And it looks pretty boring.
Okay.
Right? It's not like an NFL Super Bowl.
It's not exciting at all until you're feeling it. And then
correct.
And then it's a whole different,
And the nature is different.
Yeah.
So it's what you're learning to do. It's kind of like being, I guess, a connoisseur of consciousness itself. In that, if you like name something that you're into, maybe you're into wine or cigars or chocolate or whatever, like some
really high quality chocolate.
There you go. Okay. Now you can go into any 7-Eleven and get a chocolate bar.
Okay.
But once you get really into chocolate, you don't want that.
Right.
Then there's good chocolate. Then there's great chocolate. Then there's extraordinary chocolate. So you keep refining, like in any pursuit, could be exotic cars, could be any of these things that people pursue. There becomes an attunement, an awareness, a refinement, and an ability to pick up the subtler senses that go on within us. And so it's kind of like the more refined notes of human existence. You now become aware of. Instead of just like hitting the drums, you're aware of the oboes and when the flutes come in or when the strings hit at the perfect moment, right?
So do you follow just one way of meditation, or do you explore many different ways, or what have you found?
Well, I've used a number of different modalities. So first and foremost, I have followed mostly the practices as outlined through Yogananda's work, which is you start off with one technique, which then moves to another technique. And these are progressive, as well as an energization practice where you're moving energy into different parts of the body. And then that move forward into what he calls a Kriya experience, which is essentially a process where you're bringing the electrical energies going out of the senses into the spine and up the spine. And through that, and then later on to advance kind of processes, I used another technique, which was taught to me by a spiritual coach that I had. When I went to Escondido the first time, I actually leveraged this technique in combination with Kriya. Now, it was a really potent technique, it's a combination of an acupressure point process with a very specific forgiveness process in combination. So you're holding your hand like this, and then you're going through this intense process, and you can actually feel burning and sensing and stuff through your body. It's pretty intense. Now I overdid it, and I discovered how people talk about Kundalini sickness or these type of things. I was able to enter into a state that was quite erratic from the world sense of my whole world blew up. It took me about 1.5 years to recover from that. So,
because it opened up too much at once, or
just the turbochargers came on, and so what people have a hard time recognizing is your internal world is reflected in how you perceive the external world. And when you radically, fire things up on the internal zone, let's say you run the 4K signal through a black and white TV, the set blows, and then there's a picking up the pieces of that. And I think a lot of people who enter into a meditative path or a spiritual based path, who are really committed to that, go through sometimes multiple times throughout their life, what seems to the world is cataclysmic events, the breakups of relationships, the loss of careers, fires, theft, illness. Like a lot of people have this illusion in today's world of, once I get spiritual, I'm going to be rich and famous, and everything is going to be rainbows and unicorns. So this is the BS that's kind of sold in the new age spirituality. And my experience is, if you're really committed to your spiritual progress, it's no. You're actually going to accelerate through your karma at a faster rate. And so more crap is going to hit the fan than less. What the goal is to maintain your center while the world spins around. And so I think Yogananda says, can I stand amidst the crash of breaking worlds and remain unshaken? And those times, if you look at the historical aspects of yogis or people on a spiritual path, well, most of their lives are relatively tragic and chaotic and horrific almost to the external person, yet their inner writings and experience of divinity are just beautiful and poetic and inspired people for hundreds and thousands of years. So finding that middle point and accelerating what I can tolerate from my own karmic inheritance while still somewhat managing the world. And I think at a certain point in your life, and this usually comes near the end of one's life, I think, or the last third of the life, is people like, you know what? I've grown up as a kid. I've done my career. I've raised my family. Now I'm going to retire as the runs and really go deeper into that journey. And I think that's a life well lived. The 3 phases of life, which is that was in classical Ayurvedic philosophy, right? The first third, you're at the feet of the guru, learning the basic moral ethics, and then developing a career. The second phase, you got a career, you got a business, you got a family, you're in the world. The meditative process somewhat takes a back burner. And then that desire comes back in the last phase of life, and you become the hermit, the renunciant, the monastics, where you refine that relationship. So I was interested in that pathway.
When you were going through that, when you were having the discomfort and the life situations coming up saying, hurry up, process this and process this, do you look at these uncomfortable situations as being appropriate for the age group you were in and the thought processes, or was it past that?
I almost think I've lived my life in reverse. I think I was an old man as a teenager.
Because of what you went through?
Yeah, well, also, I dealt with death of my sister very early. I was in a very restrictive career. I was in kind of a monastic kind of world in my teenagers when I was at the lake, away from everybody. And so I had almost a monastic type life and chose bodybuilding, which is one of the most restrictive sports there is as far as diet and practice and training. So that became my ritualistic part. And I think part of one of the reasons I was attracted to the yogic philosophy, austerity and stuff, because I kind of incorporated that in bodybuilding. And interesting enough, bodybuilding had a long history in Indian culture that emerged. Most people think about the yoga side of it, but the tensing of the muscles increases the actual flow of energy. The relaxation of it increases the amount flowing through the system without resistance. So actually both aspects are part of the process that a lot of people in yoga miss. There's a lot of people in yoga that have open channels, but no juice. Okay. There's a lot of people in sport that have a lot of juice, but the channels aren't open.
So how do you bridge them?
I do both. So, and I don't have this mastered by any sense of the imagination. And usually when I get off on one, I go back and recover. So one of the things that I've been using in the last number of years is advanced neurofeedback training at 40 years of Zen and BioCybernaut, which I'm then able to refine some of the meditative and consciousness practices that I've learned techniques for in an accelerated environment, which was why I originally went to Escondido to ask you for, that was to go to an ashram with monks and do that. But now I'm leveraging technology in an ashram-like setting to really dive deeper, refine that. And then I come out and will stabilize that awareness over the next 3 to 6 months. And there's an adaptive phase. And then when that settles out and adapts, then I go back in for another push. And so that's how I've combined kind of the traditional practices outlined in classic consciousness philosophy with technological innovations of today, and then infusing that with a live work schedule, to maintain my business structure in my life and all that stuff.
How has that affected your life if you hadn't?
It's really hard to say.
Yeah.
But I would say that, and some of this is just could be potentially drawing erroneous conclusions, but we'll go with it anyways because we never really know if we're right or not.
We're meaning-making creatures. Come on, we're making meaning of the whole thing.
Yeah. Well, I haven't followed the traditional path of a normal, quote unquote, person in North America. I was never attached to possessions. I didn't care about owning home. I didn't even own a car for about 14 years. I didn't own a television for 15 years, 16 years. I didn't get in a relationship with families and kids and all that sort of stuff that most people kind of naturally progress for. Not necessarily that I didn't want it. It's just like there were all these other things that were on my process that was and then without those attachments, that allowed me to live in other parts of the world and get experience in other cultures and move through different businesses. And then I developed a business where I didn't need a brick and mortar place. So there was all these areas that supported my spiritual journey, but would look a little bit odd to the average person where, for example, when I was doing my immigration to the United States, it took literally 14 months to coalesce what my business was, what my life was like, and how that worked, and why I should be qualified as an investor in the United States, because there was no pattern for it. Like you have a multi-million-dollar company with no physical location.
Yeah.
You have people that work around the world who don't work as a W-2. They're independent people that run their own lives. You make products, but you're a technology-based company. It doesn't matter where you live. It doesn't, so all these things were very hard to condense into the world of form that we're used to traditionalized.
How was that for you trying to quantify your self-worth and you knew you had a calling to do something? Was that affecting it when you were trying to show that you deserve to be here? Or?
Well, my self-worth has never been dependent on external circumstances, and I credit my parents for that. I think my parents infused me with a lot of love as a child. And because of that, I think I had a natural, I wasn't necessarily looking outside of myself for that fulfillment, which I think a lot of people do. Mm-hmm. So kudos to them. I got that. And I think a lot of people worry about the external things they want to give kids, but it's really that sense that they're loved no matter what. And I think that I got that with my folks. And so what I found frustrating, perhaps to answer the frustration point, is I was clear about what was going on in my world. The ability to explain that to other people in a format that they understood or recognized or could relate to was almost impossible. And there was a critical component that happened in the early 2000s. And I can remember one of my close friends at the time, and her friends were meeting. There was kind of like a little get together. Mm-hmm. And I had kind of gone deeper into my spiritual, and I was having these kind of experiences and things like that. And they were all gathering around and they were all complaining about their jobs, the craziness. And that was my first inclination. Oh, I'm not part of that crowd. Right. And I was like, at that moment, I realized that I was turning away from the normal pathway in life. And it was correlated with my spiritual growth. And now I'm trying to bring that back in so that I can be in the world, but not of it. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Oh, it absolutely does. It absolutely does. And so when I think of the need to have the chaos so we can find our strengths and those weaknesses and being in the world, but not of the world, that's a theory I was brought up in my very strict religious upbringing. It was be in the world, but not of the world. And so that was hard in bringing the two together. So yeah, that means something to me when you say that, for sure. So did your family support you in this spiritual journey? Did they support you in your endeavors?
Well, I would say I've created a unique situation with my family. So my mom is very religious in that she goes to church every week. She reads her Bible every day. She's a classic, Christian in the Western sense of the world in North America. Mm-hmm. Lovely lady. My dad, not at all. So they're very polar opposites that way. My dad is, I think, got a certain resentment towards religion. My mom really believes in it, and somehow they make their relationship work. I don't know how. And so what I found is whenever I would discuss some of the stuff that was related to my own spiritual component, which wasn't relying on external verses or what the preacher told me,
Right.
was my own experiential reality, that became very threatening to my mother's belief system. So I just stopped having those conversations. And I don't live close to my parents, and the tragedy of that is I don't see them enough. The benefit is I'm less activated by the inherent patterns that we have from our family members that can be sometimes so frustrating because we're really upset, not necessarily at them, we're upset at the way we react to that.
Yeah. Yeah. Has COVID changed any of this with reconnecting with family or friends in spite of those differences?
Well, no, it's actually, COVID has been very challenging from my family perspective because my family's in Canada. And my dad went through open heart surgery during this thing. So my mom couldn't go see him in the hospital. So she's separated from her husband while he could be on his deathbed.
Yeah.
They're making these decisions. They don't know what to do. He was in the hospital for weeks and weeks and weeks. She couldn't see him, going through surgery, doesn't get to see his wife, could have made, not made it, all that stuff. I'm not able to come see them because they're senior citizens. And I have to isolate 2 weeks before I go to their house. So I've been more separated from my parents than I've ever been. I always see them twice a year. I go back and visit and spend a bit of time with them. And I talk to my parents every week. So that's been a little bit more challenging. So COVID has interrupted the natural flow of my relationship with them.
Yeah. How has your career affected your interest in your spiritual practices? I mean, are they hand in hand more so now than before?
No, they've always been in alignment. So there's a concept in Indian philosophy called dharma, which is that which you are supposed to do in life. So I was not 7 feet tall, so it was pretty obvious I wasn't going to be center in the NBA. So you're born with inherent gifts and inherent limitations. And those I don't think are negatives. They're actually guideposts of what it is that you're supposed to do. You just find out what that is. The problem is I think everybody is seeking this kind of external validation through fame and fortune and stuff. And I think that's the hook that makes people devalue what they're doing because of how much money they make or how famous they might be or what toys they have or who they know. And that's a game that is kind of empty calories. That's the junk food of purpose, right? And most people, and I used to coach these people when I was personal training. One of the things I was good at, my fitness career led into a natural coaching career, which I coach people to achieve their physical goals. And I used to tell people, hey, look, getting you in shape and losing weight, that's not a big deal.
Yeah.
What I'm really interested is discovering what you think that you're going to gain by looking a certain way. Like, what do you think you're going to gain by being fit? What do you think the payoff is? Is it going to be better relationships? Is it going to be attractiveness? Is it going to be less anxiety when you're in public? What is it? And it's almost never what people think. And I think the same thing happens in people's careers, in that they think that when they achieve this goal or make this amount of money or make this thing, that somehow the doors are going to open up and then I'll be happy. And the reality is they'll get those things, they get the dopamine hit, they go, yay, I made it. And the lights go down and they go to their house and they still have the same argument with their spouse and their kids still don't respect them the same way that they thought. And the extra numbers in their bank account or the fancy car doesn't make them feel better. It's not that any of those things aren't valuable, but we overweight those things. And so for me, I figured that out relatively early. And that was being me and doing what I do is more important than anything else. And because of that, I've got to have all those things. So there's an old saying, if you seek ye the kingdom of God, then all things shall be added unto you. Well, every time I've deviated from that program and sought all the other things, I ended up in some form of despair, destruction, unhappiness, collapse, all that stuff. And
because of the things, or because of the wanting them?
I think the pursuit of things that can't give you happiness, there's an internal representation, or I get lucky enough that it fails miserably.
Okay.
And I discover, well, what the hell am I doing? Like,
okay.
God, right? And so, and then when I go back into my spirituality, the magic starts to happen. And there's a correlative relationship by how much joy I feel and how much the frequency and depth of my meditation, regardless of the external situations. Because some of the greatest times of my life in my spiritual world were what I would say externally the most chaotic points of my life from an outside perspective. And conversely, some of the most successful, awesome places where I wasn't there, I'll give you an example, because it's always good to give tangibles.
Yes.
So I can remember one time, and these are two correlations of the same event.
Okay.
When I went to my first trip on a deeper ashram experience, meditation and stuff like that, I went through a transformation. I got to a very beatific state. And the relationship that I was in ended suddenly. My partner magically fell in love with this person automatically. There was a physiological response. She had to go. And I was able to transit out of that relationship with grace and with ease. And although there was a part of me was sad, there was a deep understanding of that. And I compassionately, and we're best friends to this day. She's a wonderful woman, works as a consultant with our company, actually.
Okay.
She's like my sister.
Yeah.
Wonderful. A few years ago, I was working really hard in a third business that I was having, kind of going for the next level with this guise that I needed, because I was engaged to a woman.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm preparing, and I'm like, okay, we're going to have kids. We're going to have family. We're going to take this to the examiner zone. I'm starting another, I'm going this. And I was working my proverbial tail off. I wasn't meditating much. I lost my capacity to that. I'm grinding in the machine of the world, everything that I know I'm not supposed to do. And all of a sudden, and then I move into this beautiful, elaborate penthouse. I've got everything that you could possibly imagine. She walks out the door. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. So I've got all the trappings that I could want. And I'm like, oh. Now I was able to transit it. I got some help. I got some things, and I was able to resolve that relatively quickly. But those are two events that my internal world was more important to how I responded to those events than the actual events. Same event, mm-hmm. essentially, the ending of a relationship, an emotional relationship, an experiential relationship. And in the first one, I literally walked out the door with nothing. Yeah. In the second one, it was a completely different experience. And so I think I'm sharing that with you because I think as people are listening to this or hearing it or going on about that, is recognizing that if you get your internal world really, really solid and sound, these things just crash like waves on the shore. Here's another wave. It's going to come in, the tide's going to come in, the tide's going to go out, and you're able to say and enjoy those waves. You know, when you get into love, which is a very deep thing, I think it's kind of a mystical experience in some ways, because everybody knows what it is, but nobody can describe it. And everybody's seeking it, and very few people truly find it.
Oh, I think our felt version of it is so distinctly different, even when we do try to compare what we're feeling from one person's experience to another.
Yeah. And the thing is, with your deepest love, right, you instantly, or the sooner that you do this, you have to accept that this person is going to result in the most amount of pain that you will experience in your emotional relationships, right? Because if, let's say you're in a romantic relationship, well, guess what? One of you, the likelihood that one of you are going to die before the other one is pretty much, unless you're both killed in a plane crash or something like that, or a car accident or something like that. But generally, you're going to experience the ultimate separation from that person. And oftentimes it's tragic and messy.
Right.
And causes great anguish in anybody that's lost a partner or gone through that. Or you're going to go through a divorce. The person's going to fall out of love with you or get involved in another relationship or whatever.
Yeah.
Get taken out by alcohol, get taken out by disease, get taken out by the world, get taken out by some external thing that nobody knows. They probably didn't intend it. It just happens.
Yeah.
Pain. Conversely, then you have kids.
Yeah.
Well, you could raise the kids as good as possible. They could get in a car accident. They could get an illness. They could get hooked on drugs. All of these things that might not necessarily represent a result of what you've done, that's their karma, that's their dharma, and that's concurrent with yours. And so your deepest relationships, the deepest loves that you have will also be the depths of pain. And so this, when one has a spiritual practice, I think it gives meaning and alleviates the suffering. Doesn't necessarily lessen the pain, but pain and suffering are two different beasts. Pain is just pain because an event, physical, emotional, psychological, has caused resistance in your life. Suffering is when you have an inability to accept that on a radical level. And of course, the great mystics have, surgery on them without anesthesia because they're able to stay on the edge of the knife without resistance to it, despite the nervous system freaking out and all that. And that's when you know you've made it.
So this is where I hear you're bridging the two worlds. So you were talking about your neurofeedback and the 40 years of Zen. And I'm sorry, I don't remember the name of the other.
That was the other one, yeah.
Okay. So when it comes to that, you've gotten to watch what your brain is doing when you're processing things, right? Am I understanding this correctly?
Well, what you're able to do is you're able to take a meditation process. And so let's say one of the practices I do elicits, you start to experience a high level of gamma, which is one of the frequencies of a certain type of meditation. Well, now, based on the feedback that I'm getting from the machine in real time, my neural network keeps wanting more and refining that aspect, which expands alpha. Same thing if I'm in theta. I'm getting the feedback of when I'm getting hemispherical synchronization as well as amplitude of the wave. And the nature of our cellular environment is to continue to grow on that. And so you're using these feedback mechanisms very much like you'd have a spiritual teacher hitting you with a stick or telling you to achieve that state because their perceptual awareness is up there. You're now getting this from a technological machine. And so it's a way of accelerating practices that you're not getting feedback on and refining those and getting better and better and better, much like watching a video recorder of yourself, maybe performing a sport and then being able to optimize the mechanics of that. It's a way of optimizing the mechanics of meditation in a way that allows you to accelerate at a far greater rate. And then of course you come back and see your brain maps and you see your scores and you're like, oh, wow, there's definitive improvement in these things. Yeah. So that becomes addictive on its own nature.
I think being aware of what we're going through when is really important for me in the understanding of myself and understanding the human nature of things, of reactions and what our body's going through when we're feeling stress or when we're feeling sadness or if we're feeling brokenhearted. And do you think you've had any unfair advantage in your resources because of what you were raised with, or is it just what you've been drawn to?
Good question. Well, I do believe when I was subjected to that kind of monastic environment when I was 15 and taken away from my family or taken away from my friends and thrust into the middle of the woods. So I got really clear what silence was like. I don't think a lot of people have that experience.
I don't think a lot of people have that experience. I grew up around avocado groves, big fields. I would sit in the fields and just by myself with the wind blowing around me. I swear I was talking to the wind. So
yeah, well, the wind will talk to you.
Right. It does.
Everything talks to you. The trees can talk to you. Like, it was one of the beauty, Jean Houston, who's a contemporary of Joseph Campbell. And I saw her, she wrote a book called The Wizard of Us. which was a take on the Wizard of Oz, because in the Wizard of Oz, what was so neat about that book is that you had the hero's journey through the perception of the female. So it wasn't a guy standing at the top of the hill with the bloodied sword as the triumphant victor. It was the use of feminine characteristics, traditionally as feminine characteristics, as a journey to the hero's journey. So for even when she destroyed the wicked witch, she wasn't trying to destroy the witch. She was just trying to get the fire out on the scarecrow, which then melted the witch.
Oh.
So she wasn't trying to destroy the witch. She was trying to help her friend. All the people that came along, she wasn't trying to like, let's go up against the dragon. It's like, we're on an adventure to find the wizard, so you can get a heart and you can get a brain, and you know what I mean? This one can get some courage and I can get home.
Yeah.
Completely. So she does a beautiful illustration of that impact. And I would say that meditation is best described to me by a guy by the name of David Hawkins, Meditation and Contemplation, who wrote Power versus Force and the whole series. And I got to meet him many times, and it was extraordinary.
Oh, I'm happy for you. Okay.
Yeah, there's a picture on my Facebook page of him when he was blessing me in that moment. It was transcendental. It was extraordinary. He said the process of spiritual evolution is moving forward. So it's a yang movement in a yin position where your hands are kind of like this, you know, in that yin position. And so moving forward in acceptance of what is, which is not always easy, to a radical level, so that to the point you can be like a Gandhi, who, when the assassin comes and shoots him, he blesses them as he transits his life. I mean, that's a supreme state of calmness and unruffledness by the world that most people can't even comprehend. It's represented in the history of Jesus. It's represented in Buddha. It's illustrated in, you know, Arjuna, in his relationship with Krishna and the battle where he has to fight his enemies and all these sort of things. So this has been echoed throughout traditional times, but the process is an internal struggle and an internal battle, so that you need to have the yang action, but the yin of the acceptance of what comes in life.
Mm-hmm. I just think of cognitive reframe and the change in the brain when you're repackaging the situation that's happening. Yeah.
And as far as advantages, yes. Without a doubt, for whatever reason, 22, I had a near-death experience, went through the life review, saw God, experienced a variety of different lifetimes, no experience with anything like that. Later on in 2000, I had a transcendental experience with Yogananda coming into my presence, physical presence. And then, I had the good fortune of meeting and spending time a little bit with Dr. Hawkins and receiving his blessings. And then a number of trips to ashram life that I've been able to experience, as well as 2 events happened just recently in the last 6 months during neurofeedback training.
Oh, were you able to go up there during this?
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. I went up. I just got back.
Good.
And so there's a line in Autobiography Yogi that I've always resonated with, and now I can share this as an experiential reality. And the line is, the contemporaries of a master are not limited to the narrow present. And that line always stuck with me.
Okay.
Well, in recent times, I've had 2 experiences in depth of meditation under neurofeedback conditions where time and space were stepped out of, and I was able to have personal interactions with my spiritual teachers. And those moments are as real as anything we experience on the linear plane. I recognize that's extraordinary, unusual. I've been around people that meditated for 30, 40 years, and they haven't had those experiences, and they keep going faithfully and doing their practices without much experience. And so I just feel like it's almost embarrassing to say it, because I don't think in some ways I've really done the work that a lot of these people have done. I feel like a spiritual billionaire that inherited some trust fund, and I'm trying to figure out how to steward this energy. It's just like, okay, how do I steward this in a way that helps people or environments? And so that correlates in my work, that correlates in my relationships, that correlates in my friendships. I've kept that theme through everything that I do, so everything becomes part of my spiritual advancement. And then the pieces that aren't fitting into that, because I'm not a saint. And thankfully, Dr. Hawkins illustrated one time the difference between sainthood and enlightenment. And I was like, oh God, thank Lord, because I figured sainthood was really off the table for me. I got just like, no, I really want to be one. I liked, but I just got this personality that kind of doesn't work out very well. So, but enlightenment is, so sainthood being the perfection of the personality, enlightenment being transcendent of it. So you actually are not concerned with the personality. You kind of transcend your ideas, what you are in the world. And I was like, okay, I think I can make that one. Sainthood off the table. We blew that one a long time ago.
Okay. So with the work that you do though, like with the BioOptimizers, with health, nutrition, fitness, and all of that, that whole side of what you're doing, that's you looking at your biology and saying, okay, these ingredients are affecting me, but your thought processes are too. And so that's why I was asking if you had an unfair advantage for you to grow up without external stimulants. So you were growing up in the woods, you were growing up in a quiet, calm environment. And so you didn't have TV, you didn't have traffic, you didn't have, the road pollution, you didn't have all of that. So I look at that as an unfair advantage, the same way as that avocado grove with, fields, and it was just peaceful. And I got to feel something that perhaps somebody growing up in New York City didn't get to feel. So those people in New York City. So this morning I was talking to my shaman friend in New York City, and he's reflecting on his travels with his family going down into South America and being in the peace. Yet when he goes back to New York City, it's just total chaos. So what do you do to support that total chaos? Because you are there in LA doing your thing. So you felt the peace, and then how do you support that?
Yep. Great point. And you're right. It is an advantage. Like I said, I got to experience what silence really is.
Right.
And so then I can experience, well, I'm not in silence right now. My brain's running, the stimulation's too much, I'm feeling the EMFs, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And so I would liken it to this. Yes, I had a taste of that space. So I had a reference point.
Yeah.
The other thing is having so little stimuli and also getting involved in bodybuilding at such an early year, I became acutely aware of the internal workings of my physiology. Meditation helped me become acutely aware of the internal machinations of my mind. So I'm not my body, and I'm not my thoughts, and I'm not my emotions. Those are expressions of a deeper awareness. And so I can see it's not that I don't own my emotions or my thoughts or my feelings or my sensations, but they're in a different reference points as feedback monitors. Is like, oh, my heart rate's too up. To me, it's like, oh, I'm not emotionally stable today. I think I got to go back and remodulate, or my brain is racing. I need to go out to the beach and just sit there for 20 minutes or go for a walk with my feet in the sand. So these are, as opposed to they are me, they're just data points of information that I don't need to be attached to. It's like, as I always say, is sometimes God needs an asshole and there's nobody else around, so I have to volunteer for
You're
the job.
the vessel. You get to be the asshole.
Because you've all had those interactions that you walked away from and you looked at yourself and you're like, Jesus, I was a dickhead.
Right?
Why was I such a dickhead?
Right.
And the very next person that you interact, you're as sweet as pie and everything's normal. And you're like, one of the things I'd like to do is review the day. And I go, God, I didn't do very well on that one.
Right.
And that person's probably thinking, boy, that Wade Lightheart, boy, he's a real ass. And it's true.
But you were meant to be the ass in that person's life.
Correct. Now that doesn't mean saying, hey, I can't wait to be an ass for everybody. That's my dharma. maybe some people that is their dharma, who knows?
Right.
But I find that fascinating, and I become less attached to it. And I definitely do use that as a thing, because oftentimes we hurt people, or we say things that are interpreted by people in ways that we had no idea from. And then you find out sometimes years later that was so devastating from you. Like, oh my God, that's so, like, that wasn't my intention. I'm so apologetic. And then, all of a sudden this whole chaotic thing melts away in an instant, like, sugar and water.
Yeah. I know that feeling. I know that feeling of looking at the emotions, looking at what I went through and going, I was just that vessel that brought that up for that person. And I don't like seeing myself that way, but I have to remind myself that we all have to see what comes up for us. But we also have to see that I don't have to be that person anymore. But there was something bigger than me, and me wanting to or not to be in that dynamic with them. And it hurts sometimes. It really does.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then we also hurt or beat ourselves up about it.
Yes.
One of the things I noticed was fascinating when I was going to see Dr. David Hawkins, and at the end of his events, people get in a lineup and ask him questions. And what would be so fascinating was one person would come up and he'd be very sweet and very pious, and like there would be this interaction. The next person would come up and he'd just slam them. And then the next person would come up and it'd be a different, so he just modulated what that person needed at the moment with zero attachment to how he was perceived, how that person perceived him. His spiritual intention was able to ascertain what that person needed and to express what he needed or not express or throw it out or walk, and it was a very interesting dynamic of watching. And anybody that watches his videos will start to see that in the questions of answers of how one person, or then you watch other ones and one person will ask one question, he'll answer it one way. Another person comes in and he answers it another way because it's relative to where that person is in their journey.
So he can tell that based on their energy.
Yeah. He just dialed into it instantly. I mean, he had a pretty extraordinary level of consciousness and awareness.
So when you're looking at people you're training, because you have been doing embodiment practices for a very long time, the awareness of the emotions going through the body, the awareness of being able to communicate with others, do you think that by being a bodybuilder, you've become that much more aware of your posture, of how you're standing, sitting, walking, and the emotions that it creates for you? That are you able to look at others and know how to approach them based on their posture or based on the emotions they're emitting?
Both.
Yeah.
Both. I think also as a public speaker, you have the opportunity of modulating instantly with a large group of people. And if you get really good at it, you literally tune in with the crowd. Mm-hmm. So the crowd is pulling through you. And that's why I do a little surrender prayer before. It's not about me. It's not about the event. It's about the people in it. And so that I be a divine channel to voice out, because I have an ability to speak and to communicate in a way that people understand. And I'm not intimidated by large crowds. I'm invigorated by them. Okay. And that's unusual. Those are unusual qualities. And by turning it over to divinity, it comes through. But you also are getting dynamic feedback on the spot of what's landing and what's not, and cadence and rhythm and emotionality. Mm-hmm. And the beauty of being on stage, for example, is that I can be as extreme as I want to be and nobody's intimidated. If I'm in a room of people, it's like, God, that Wade's kind of crazy and loud. But on stage, that's what you need. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes I feel as deep in meditation when I'm speaking in front of 1,000, 2,000 people than I am in the depths of the Himalayas, in some ashram. I'm as tuned into divinity in that moment on stage that most people would find terrifying. Okay. As I am when I'm sitting and sometimes more so.
That the word that comes to mind when you're saying that is a state of euphoria. And I know in certain people's presence, I've felt a state of euphoria as I'm learning with them, through them, and that with the message coming through spirit, for me, it's hard to not separate that shared love of just love and light and learning. And I had the experience last year of meeting someone, I guess it was 2 years ago. And it was the weirdest feeling to be tracking the message coming through. And so that energy you're talking about, I've only felt, and then separated the two. I realized that is just love. It's just the love of learning and engaging and feeling that connection with others. And so when you're talking about being on stage and you're talking about that energy, it's just love. Like you're just sharing love with others. And so when you referred to love earlier, that love of learning, the love of light, but you also are that vessel. So even if you're going to make people angry, even if people are going to get mad or frustrated, like you get to be that vessel of both.
Mm-hmm.
How do you recharge yourself with that? You know, that's a big responsibility.
Yeah.
It's a huge job.
It is. And I think that's also concordantly, there's a danger that occurs, which I think there's various obstacles at different levels of awareness. And I think you get the fallen guru syndrome. There's many gurus that get to a point, and the traps that are set don't come from outside of oneself. It comes from inside your followers.
How so?
Well, I think what happens is people become enamored with what they think you are. Mm-hmm. You become their de facto guru or teacher or spiritual stuff, and they project onto you something that is very attractive to the spiritual ego. I think it can enhance that. Oh, I'm so enlightened, or I'm so aware, or I'm so peaceful, or so knowledgeable, or conscientious, or whatever. And that's the hook. So the ego becomes a spiritual ego and is then now perception. The other thing is, if you do hit a certain level, oftentimes fame comes with that. Mm-hmm. Money comes with that. Mm-hmm. And then also the potential seduction from followers. So if you're using the Hawkins chart, let's say, for those who aren't familiar, 0 is death and 1,000 is the highest state by consciousness. 200 is the level of courage. 500 is the level of love. Enlightenment starts around 600 to 700. And then 540 is unconditional love. So let's say you get to a level of unconditional love, which is a great place where you're in a really true state of unconditional love. Mm-hmm. Of everything, your wife walks out the door, your kids hate you, and you're like, oh, I love you anyways, it's okay. Like, that's a really great place to be. And I think it's a realistic goal for people to achieve in their spiritual. Maybe enlightenment's not possible, maybe sainthood's not impossible, but 540 is a pretty good level. But let's say that you become good at that, and you have your group and you have your organization and you're in this unconditional love, and you have a quote unquote student or devotee who's now coming to you, and she's feeling the presence of that unconditional love, and it's exchanged, but they're at a lower level of awareness and consciousness, and the universal feeling of that consciousness is pouring through you, but they're experiencing it as individual attention from you, the teacher. Yes. And all of a sudden they become intimately and romantically attracted to the teacher. Right. And ultimately they end up in some sexual relationship. And then because the teacher is like, well, that was just an unconditional love thing. And then on to the next one, and then to the next one, because there's no differentiation for that person's awareness between the individual persons. But the damage that they're doing to that person is that person isn't in that place. Right. And so you've essentially raped them spiritually, because what their version of God and divinity and the teacher and the guru and the teacher has now withdrawn that love for another. And they don't have yet cultivated the attention and awareness to understand the dynamics, and the guru crashes and the students fill out and the organization falls apart. And this happens over and over and over again. So it's obviously a challenge that, I mean, I'm sure I've never had to deal with this, of course, I'm not that kind, but if I was to get there, I'd go, Jesus, that's probably a tough one to deal with.
So what struck me is since meeting him, since going through that 24-hour window and talking to him a few more times, I realized that idea of falling in love, gets so confused by being seen, by communicating a similar spiritual message, by feeling that state of euphoria when you're in a big room and there's all of this dopamine going crazy, all this oxytocin, and you feel seen, you feel understood. And I realized it's just the essence of love. Maybe I'm not using the right words, but the essence of love and just learning together and growing together. And that right there, I kid you not, was like a breaking point for me. I'm like, I don't know what love is. I love learning. I felt love from my parents because they were sharing wisdom about their spiritual belief systems, about their studies, about their health, their nutrition, the ideas of family, and to have so much information poured into me. And the more I meet other people, I just want to pick their brain, because through that, I'm loving myself. And so that just blew my mind to go through that experience. But to hear you talk about being in a crowd and in a big room of a lot of people and you're sharing, like, that is a huge gift. So to hold space for that many people, does that deplete you? Does that confuse lines of communication and in how you show up and how you're presenting, so that you can avoid illusions of who you are, whether it's your illusions or somebody else's? I think
it's extremely invigorating. So for example, if I'm giving a talk in the afternoon, very difficult for me to go to bed early that night. There's so much juice that courses through the system that you've been given out of the intention, your intention to serve, and the audience intention to learn. And the combination of those two things can be very, very seductive on an energetic level. And sure, I think it's easy to get enamored with that persona and to kind of play the role, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And there's positives and negatives to it, because you also get to learn what's possible for yourself, even though that you're only there for a very temporary moment. It's an inspiration of, well, how do I bring this into my life on every single level of my life? That super state that I was able to have. How can I bring that into my relationships with my partner, with my friends, with the people I work with, and whatever? And when it's only one person,
Mm-hmm.
or it's only two people, or you're not getting the feedback that you get from that audience or the crowd, you're hearing the whispers of, like, who the hell does this guy think he says? So when that crowd of 2,000 people is going, well, there's 100 people in that thing that hate me, but I don't notice that because I'm rocking with the 1,000 that do love me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's all I'm feeling, because I'm choosing to tune into that.
Yeah.
And so it's a delicate dance between the two pieces, I think. And I think it's a continuous refinement.
Do you feel like life is giving you a new invitation to process a new role through all the changes that have been happening in COVID, or are you already stepping up to new possibilities of what you are meant to do?
You know, it's almost embarrassing to report, because I've cultivated a deep empathy for humanity in the world, and there is a tremendous amount of suffering going on in the planet right now, horrific levels, on levels that certainly are underreported here in the Western world because of the consequences of the medications and the death, destruction, and disease that's spreading around the world by interrupting the food supply chain, the economic structure of stuff. There are probably way more people that died from the mitigations than will ever from the mitigations, you know, virus aside, whatever people's beliefs are, that's real.
Yeah.
And then also the loss of business and the potential stuff that's happening and what's going to be coming economically, because, you know, there is no free money. There's no, so the velocity of money determines how many people get to participate, and you've cut the velocity of the exchange of that flow. And so it's like interrupting the Krebs cycle. But the unusual part is, during this time, I've had some of my most sublime spiritual experiences, transcendental experiences, where the pages of autobiography, Yogi, for example, come together as the mystic living that experience, not as a thought, not as a concept, as an experiential living reality. And my business career has exploded. My company is doing phenomenal because of the circumstances, because we're not as affected, because we don't have physical presence, because everybody works from home, because we're in the health industry, because we run our stuff mostly on digital platforms. It's the perfect storm. So our company is growing exponentially, and it's my job to bring as many people into the company so that they can provide for their families. That's also part of my responsibility as an executive in my company, is to take care of the people inside of my company so that they can take care of the people who are interacting with my company. So that's going great. I was in a place where it was terrible and like it got really destroyed from what's happened, mitigations here in Venice, and then magically found another place that was everything that I dreamed of. So I moved into this new place. It's a biohome. I got a gym on the roof.
Nice.
I've got my studio that I'm in right now, and then I've got my living space, and then all this biohacking stuff, and stuff just keeps showing up. It's like this vacuum that can, so nice. I'm experiencing this nonstop miraculous in the middle of the most challenging times in my lifetime. And so the dichotomy between the two of those things, like the contrast, it literally blows my mind every day. And I find myself in awe. Wow. It's not like I don't get hooked into some of the aspects or out into the transcendental world. It's just, it's like trying to find the center within those things. And it's like, it's really remarkable times. Yeah. So as Charles Dickens says, it was the best of times and the worst of times. And I really feel I understand that.
What do you think is possible based on your awareness and understanding of what you know now versus last year, year before, 5 years ago, before you ever did any biofeedback or started assessing your thought processes?
I would say that I am absolutely at peace with my own death. So I've contemplated the one thing that is the base, I think, of all fears, which is the dissolution of the show. We want the show to continue to go on, and we avoid this. And I'm enjoying the show. And when the show's over, I'm going to be, that was a good show, and that's it. And I'm at peace with that. And when you're at peace with your own demise and you've contemplated your own death, not in a macabre down kind of side way, but I'm really recognizing that there is some intimate cycle to this beautiful evolutionary process. Somehow I'm alive, floating on this piece of dirt and water at some inconspicuous part of the galaxy that's been going on for billions and billions of years that we're aware of in this plane and dimension. And somehow I exist, and somehow we're on this podcast, and somehow I have this relationship, and there's things that grow in the ground and I can eat them. And like, there's this whole, everything's kind of going. Yeah. And the moment dawned on me a few years ago. I was walking down the street in Vancouver, Canada, and it was a rainy, cold day. And when it's a rainy, cold day in the Pacific Northwest, it's really kind of nasty. And so you're trying to find every little piece of dry thing as you're walking down the street. And there was a little awning there. And on the steps, the little dry spot in the middle of this rain. And on the steps, someone had busted up some breadcrumbs and stuff. And there was these two little birds eating this food. And I said to myself, you see, those birds woke up in the rain this morning and they're looking for food. And somebody came out of this door and either set the food there, dropped the food there, something happened to put that food there. And here are these little birds who we think that we're so much brighter than and organized and smarter than or whatever, found this food and are sitting there having a dinner, and they have no concept of where that came from, how it was produced. They didn't build this dry spot, and they're having a great little time. So is my life that different? No. We know it's going to end.
Right.
And the beauty of when you contemplate its end, and why that finitude experience of this lifetime in the realm of infinity is so important, is because it gives meaning to the moments and people that I get to interact. Because I know every time I see someone, it's one step closer to the last time I see them. And therefore I want to make the most of it.
Yeah. That's so impactful, just living that way. That's huge. Mm-hmm. Wade, do you feel like there's anything else life wants you to share today with us?
Well, I think more importantly for people who are listening, if they're tuned into this podcast or this event or got here somehow, we're somehow connected.
Yeah.
You wouldn't be here. And if there's something here that resonated with you or something here that rubbed up against you, then that's probably a point of investigation. Yeah. And I would say this. You might have read all the mystical books in the world and done all the practices and drank the shaman juice and did the meditations and did the purgings and listened to the writings and done the teachings and all those sort of things that we do and balanced your chakras and feng shuied your house and did the Rolfing and the, you know, and all that sort of stuff, all the kind of experiences that you might do.
Yeah.
But in the end, I believe that the subtle energies of consciousness are readily available with you if you will dive deep and go to them. And once you've gotten a taste of divinity, nothing else will do.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. My guest today is Wade Lightheart. It's been wonderful. Thank you for sharing and just diving into life and being that vessel to piss people off.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate it. It's a very great conversation.
Thank you.